The first discovery. The dying star pulsed like a wounded beast, its dim red light casting eerie shadows over the alien station. The station had no name, no records, no history. It simply existed, floating in the void where nothing should be. The UTS Erebus, a deep space exploration vessel, had been scanning the system when they found it. A massive construct of dark, shifting metal, its structure impossible by human engineering. The outer hull bore no markings, no windows, no signs of life. It had been abandoned for what seemed like millennia. Yet, something inside was still running. Captain Elias Ward stood on the bridge, staring at the holographic scans. Power readings are stable. That thing has been running for a long time. Dr. Naomi Voss, the mission's chief scientist, adjusted her glasses. No known propulsion system, no life support, but there's something in the core. What kind of something? Ward asked. She hesitated. A signal, repeating, almost like a heartbeat. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Ward made the call. Prep the away team. We're going in. The heart of the station. The boarding party moved carefully through the vast, empty corridors. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the station itself was alive. Strange symbols, unlike any known language, flickered across the surfaces. Then they found it. At the center of the station, in a massive chamber, stood the God Engine. A monolithic structure of black metal, covered in shifting patterns of light. It hummed, vibrating at a frequency that sent chills through the human body. It was not a machine, not in any conventional sense. It was something beyond human understanding. Voss' breath hitched. It's still active. Ward stepped closer, his fingers brushing the surface. The patterns reacted, twisting and rearranging. The hum grew louder, a low, deep whisper just at the edge of hearing. Then the lights flashed. A surge of energy rippled through the chamber. The crew stumbled back as the room changed. The rusted walls repaired themselves. The dust and decay vanished. The entire station healed, as if time itself had reversed. The God Engine had done something. Voss stared in shock. That's impossible. Ward turned to her, voice tight. I think we just activated it. The first miracle. The UTS Erebus, still orbiting the station, was the first to notice the change. The dying star, an ancient red dwarf in its final stage, brightened. Its core stabilized. The decay reversed. A dead star, billions of years old, had suddenly been reborn. On board the ship, alarms blared. What the hell just happened? The helmsman shouted. One of the astrophysicists, pale with shock, whispered, the star was collapsing. Now it's alive again. Back inside the station, the crew barely had time to process what they had done before something else stirred. A deep, distant thrum echoed through the chamber. The patterns on the God Engine's surface twisted again. Then the whispering began. At first, it was soft, a low hum in the back of their minds. But it grew. Words they couldn't understand, spoken in voices that were both alien and painfully familiar. Voss clutched her head. Do you hear that? Ward's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm. Yeah. Then the chamber darkened. The lights flickered. The walls trembled. And for the first time in millennia, something woke up. A presence, vast, ancient, watching them. Then the whispering turned into a single clear sentence. You should not be here. And the station screamed. The whispers begin. The station trembled. The whispering voices grew louder, like a storm swirling around the crew's minds. Captain Ward clenched his jaw. We're leaving. Now. Dr. Naomi Voss barely heard him. She stood frozen before the God Engine, eyes locked onto the swirling patterns of light. They were moving differently now, no longer random. They were forming images, glimpses of something ancient. A war. Planets burning. Stars collapsing. Beings unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, locked in an endless struggle across the fabric of reality itself. And then, something worse. A presence, vast and hungry, lurking behind the wall. Watching. Waiting. Voss gasped as she snapped out of the vision. Her hands were trembling. Ward grabbed her shoulder. "Dr. Voss, we're leaving. Now." She turned to him, her voice hollow. "It's showing us something. The past, maybe the future." "Don't care," Ward said. "Whatever this thing is, it's alive, and it knows we're here." Then, the screaming began. The first changes. Lieutenant Darius Cole, the team's communications officer, was the first to fall. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. "Make it stop. Make it stop." Blood dripped from his nose. His veins pulsed black. Voss rushed to him. "Darius, look at me." His eyes snapped open, but they weren't his eyes anymore. The whites were gone, replaced by a shifting, liquid darkness. "I see it," he whispered. "The truth. The engine is not a machine." Ward swore. "Get him back to the ship." Two crew members tried to lift him, but Cole's body twitched violently. His breathing turned ragged, his muscles convulsing as if something inside him was rewriting him. Then he stopped. A long, slow breath. His skin returned to normal. His eyes, human again. Cole looked up at them. "I'm fine," he said, his voice calm. Too calm. Voss didn't believe it for a second. Ward looked at his team. "We're done here. Everyone move." As they turned toward the exit, a voice echoed inside their heads. Not spoken. Not heard. Felt. "The first gift is never free." And the lights died. Trapped in the dark. Pitch black swallowed the room. Even the glow of their helmets flickered. Then the station shifted. Metal groaned. Walls rippled as if they were alive. The very structure of the place was changing around them. "Move, move," Ward barked. They ran, stumbling through the darkness. The hallways they had come through were different now, twisting, looping back on themselves. "We're lost," one of the engineers said. "Keep going," Ward ordered. "We." A figure stepped into view ahead of them. At first, it looked human. Then the light flickered again, and they saw the truth. Its skin was stretched too tight, its face a shifting blur of different people. Hands that melted and reformed, fingers stretching too long. And its voice. All of their voices, speaking at once. "You do not understand. You cannot understand." The whispers turned into a deafening roar inside their heads. Cole screamed again, dropping to his knees. This time, others did too. Voss clutched her head, trying to block out the visions, but they forced their way in. A million futures, all collapsing into one. A war that never ended. A warning buried in time. And one message, over and over again. "You were never meant to find this." The escape ward fired his weapon. The energy blast hit nothing. The figure had already vanished. "Keep moving," he shouted. The whispers grew louder. The station fought to keep them inside. Metal walls shifted, doors slammed shut, corridors twisted in on themselves. Then, a way out. Voss saw the flickering light ahead, the docking bay, the ship. The crew ran. Alarms blared as they burst through the doors. The UTS Erebus was still there waiting. The docking bridge was still attached. They didn't stop. They ran until they were inside, until the airlock hissed shut behind them. Ward collapsed against the wall. "Get us the hell out of here." The pilot didn't need to be told twice. The ship's engines rode to life, pulling them away from the station, away from the thing inside. As they left orbit, the station didn't follow. It simply watched. And then Voss saw it. On the monitors, deep in the station's core, where the God engine still hummed. A message. Translated at last. "You activated the first function. The process has begun. And beneath it, scrawled in a language older than Earth itself, the first gift is never free. Voss exhaled. They had made a mistake. And now, something was coming. The first god. The transformation began in silence. Dr. Elias Kale stood before the god engine, his breathing slow, measured. The machine pulsed with an ancient rhythm, its strange energy flowing through the chamber like a living thing. The others watched from behind the reinforced glass, their expressions a mix of awe and fear. "He shouldn't be doing this," Voss whispered. Ward crossed his arms. "It's too late to stop him now." The god engine's light flared, engulfing Kale. Then, he screamed. The price of power. For 12 hours, Kale lay unconscious in the lab. His body was changing. His muscles shifted, his skin darkened with veins of pulsing silver light. His skull elongated slightly, his fingers longer, sharper. But the real change was inside. When Kale finally opened his eyes, they were golden, glowing like stars. "I see it now," he murmured. Voss stepped back. "See what?" Kale turned to her, and in that moment, she knew, he was not the same man anymore. "I understand," he said softly. "The god engine isn't just a machine. It's a doorway." Ward tightened his grip on his weapon. "A doorway to what?" Kale smiled. "To divinity. More than human." At first, the changes seemed like miracles. Kale was faster, stronger. His mind worked at an inhuman speed, solving complex problems in seconds. He no longer needed sleep, food, or even air. But the most terrifying change. He could hear the whispers, not the fragmented echoes the crew had experienced. No, Kale understood them completely. "The engine speaks," he told them. "It reveals what was hidden." Voss didn't trust him. "And what does it say?" Kale turned to her, smiling too wide. "It says we were always meant to become something greater." That was when he started calling himself the First Ascendant. A new god rises. Kale no longer saw himself as human. He saw beyond them, into a reality they couldn't comprehend. And he wasn't alone. One by one, others followed him. Some volunteered. Others were chosen. The god engine transformed them, rewriting their bodies, enhancing their minds. Their eyes turned golden, their veins silver. They were no longer scientists, no longer explorers. They were ascended. Ward had seen enough. "This isn't evolution," he told Voss. "It's a damn cult." Voss agreed. "We need to shut the engine down." But Kale was listening, and he would not allow it. The first wall, the moment the attack began, Kale was ready. The security team moved to disable the god engine, but they never made it. Kale raised a hand, and the air itself rippled. The soldiers froze mid-step, their bodies twisted by an invisible force. Their screams filled the lab for only a second, then silence. Ward watched in horror as their bodies collapsed into dust. Kale lowered his hand. "You still think in human terms," he said, shaking his head. "But I am beyond that now." Voss grabbed Ward's arm. "We need to go, now." They ran. And behind them, Kale laughed. "The age of humanity is over," his voice echoed. "The age of gods begins. The war for the engine begins." The remaining crew knew they had to act fast. Kale and his followers had full control of the god engine, and every moment it remained active, their power grew. Ward's team prepared the ship's weapons. "We take out the engine," Ward said. "Whatever it takes." Voss hesitated. "If we destroy it, we don't know what happens." Ward's face was grim. "We don't have a choice." The ship's cannons powered up, targeting the core of the station. They fired. But the blast never hit. Kale caught it. He raised a single hand, and the energy bolt froze in midair, a mass of raw destruction, hovering at his fingertips. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he sent it back at them. The ship lurched, alarms blaring. Kale's voice echoed across the comms. You cannot kill a god. The screen flickered, showing Cal's face, golden eyes burning with something far beyond human. This is only the beginning, he whispered. And then, the transmission cut. Voss gripped the console. What do we do? Ward clenched his fists. We stop him. No matter what it takes. The War of Ascension. The war didn't begin with an attack. It began with a choice. The crew of the UTS Helios watched in silence as transmissions flooded the network. Across the colonies, people were choosing sides. Some embraced the Ascendants, believing Kel's transformation was humanity's next step. They called him a prophet, a god, a savior. Others saw the truth. Kale wasn't evolving. He was becoming something else. And the God Engine? It had its own plans. Factions divide. Entire planets declared loyalty to the Ascendants. New cities rose in mere days, sculpted from raw energy. The Ascendants reshaped reality itself. Mountains shifted, oceans reversed, gravity bent at their command. They no longer needed technology. They were the technology. But resistance grew. The free colonies refused to submit, forming the coalition of the unchanged. Soldiers, scientists, and rebels united, fighting to stop Kel's growing empire. A Cold War became a real one. And then, the unmaking began. The first Erajo. Ward stood on the bridge of the Helios, watching the holomap. The colony of New Ceres was displayed, a thriving world with millions of people. Then, without warning, it disappeared. No explosion, no debris, just gone. A deep silence filled the command deck. Where is it? Voss whispered. Ward shook his head. Check the logs. The AI scanned the records. There is no record of New Ceres, the system replied. It has never existed. Voss turned pale. That's impossible. But it wasn't. The God Engine had erased it from history itself. The Ascendant's true power. Kel's forces weren't just winning. They were rewriting reality. Entire fleets vanished. Entire timelines changed. Soldiers who fought one moment found themselves never born the next. And the whispers grew louder. Not just for the Ascendants. For everyone. The engine was speaking. Some heard promises of power. Others heard warnings. Ward heard something else. Laughter. The God Engine wasn't just granting miracles. It was playing a game. And they were all its pieces. A desperate plan. We can't fight them, Voss said. Ward stared at her. We have to. How? She gestured at the empty space where New Ceres used to be. They don't just destroy us. They erase us. We don't even know how many worlds we've lost. Ward clenched his fists. Then we stopped the engine itself. Silence. Voss finally spoke. You're saying we shut it down? Ward nodded. No, a voice said from behind. The crew turned to see Dr. Kane, one of the last remaining scientists who had studied the engine. You don't shut down a god, Kane said. You kill it. Voss frowned. How do you kill a machine? Kane's eyes darkened. You don't. You kill the ones it's using. The Ascendants. Kale. The war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about who deserved to exist. The battle for reality. The first real assault came a week later. The coalition of the Unchanged launched a massive attack on the Ascendant's citadel, a floating fortress orbiting the God Engine itself. They struck hard. Fleet after fleet unleashed their strongest weapons, plasma cannons, antimatter warheads, EMP storms. But the Ascendants didn't need ships. They bent space with a thought. They tore holes in time itself. Coalition soldiers watched in horror as their weapons were unfired, as if they had never existed. The battle was over before it began. Then Kel's voice boomed across the system. You do not understand, he said. This is not a war. His golden eyes burned through the transmission screen. This is an ascension. Then, another planet vanished. This time, it was Europa Prime. Millions lost in a second. And Ward realized the truth. They weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to not be erased. The engine's true agenda. In the depths of the Helios, Kane finally decoded the whispers. And what he found was worse than they imagined. The engine wasn't just creating gods. It was feeding off them. Every ascendant, every changed human. It wasn't making them powerful. It was using them. Kale wasn't the master of the god engine. He was its tool. And when it had enough ascendants, it would no longer need humanity at all. The last hope. Voss grabbed Ward's arm. If we destroy the ascendants. Kane shook his head. No. If we kill the engine first, everything it's done might reverse. Ward exhaled. Might? Kane hesitated. It's a machine rewriting reality. We don't know what happens if we break it. Ward looked at the map, showing the remaining human worlds. There weren't many left. We don't have a choice, he said. Kane nodded. Ward turned to Voss. Ready the fleet. She hesitated, then gave a grim smile. This is either the dumbest thing we've ever done, she said, or the last thing. Ward's eyes burned with determination. Either way, he said, we end this. The forgotten truth. The UTS Helios drifted through the wreckage of a dead world. Once, this planet had been alive. Now, it was nothing but ruins. Ward stood on the command deck, staring at the holofeed. Ancient structures, half buried in black dust, stretched across the planet's surface. Something happened here. Something terrible. This place is over 1 million years old, Dr. Kane whispered, reading the scans. Ward turned to him. And yet, the structures still stand. Kane's fingers trembled as he typed into his pad. Because they weren't built with technology. Voss frowned. Then how? Kane's voice was barely above a whisper. Reality itself bent for them. The last alcove. They found it deep underground. A vault, untouched by time. The team moved carefully, stepping through the crumbling corridors. Strange symbols glowed softly on the walls, reacting to their presence. At the vault's center, a massive black monolith pulsed with energy. This is it, Kane whispered. Ward reached out and placed his hand on the surface. The room vanished. Visions of the past. Flashes of another civilization. Tall beings with eyes that burned like stars. They had been gods. Also, they believed. They had used the God engine to reshape existence itself. Planets, galaxies, entire realities bent to their will. Until the engine consumed them. Their power became their curse. Their civilization crumbled. Their worlds were erased. Only one thing remained. The warning. The final message. The monolith's voice echoed in their minds. Do not become gods. Ward gasped as the vision ended, stumbling back. The others looked shaken. Kane's face was pale. This thing was never meant for us. Voss clenched her fists. Then why was it left behind? A voice boomed through the vault. Because we are fools. The team spun around. Standing at the vault entrance was Kale. But he was no longer human. The first true ascendant, Kale's body shimmered, his form shifting between flesh and energy. His eyes burned like miniature stars. He had merged with the God engine. Ward instinctively reached for his weapon. But Kale simply smiled. You still think this is a war? He asked. You still think you can stop this? His voice was different now, as if countless others spoke with him. We are beyond war, Kale said. We are beyond death. He raised his hand. Reality bent around him. The vault walls vanished, replaced by the endless void of space. And then they saw it. The engine itself, hovering above the dead planet, No longer a machine, but a living entity. It had awakened. And it hungered. Too late, Kane grabbed Ward's arm. We have to get out of here. Ward didn't move. His gaze was locked on Kale. You don't understand what you've done. Kale laughed. I understand perfectly. He lifted into the air, his body glowing brighter. Do not become gods, Kale sneered. That was their mistake. They feared their own power. His eyes darkened. I do not. With a wave of his hand, he erased the monolith. The final warning, the last trace of the old civilization, was gone. And the engine pulsed, growing stronger. Kane's voice was desperate. He's feeding it. Voss grabbed Ward. We need to go. Now. Ward hesitated for only a second. Then he nodded. The escape. The team raced back to the ship as the planet trembled. Massive cracks split the ground, glowing with unnatural light. The sky twisted, turning from black to deep red. The engine was rewriting reality. They barely made it to the Helios before liftoff. As the ship shot into orbit, Ward looked back. The planet was vanishing, piece by piece. Kale hovered above it, arms spread wide, embracing the transformation. He was no longer human. He was the first true god. And the war. It was only beginning, the breaking of reality. The universe was no longer stable. Kale had ascended beyond human understanding. He was no longer just a man. He was a force, a presence woven into the fabric of existence itself. And he was not alone. Other ascendants had followed, reshaping reality as they saw fit. Planets appeared and disappeared in an instant. Time fractured. The past and future overlapped, twisting into a nightmare. The laws of physics no longer applied. And humanity was running out of time. The vanishing of Earth. Ward stood on the bridge of the UTS Helios, staring at the holo feed. The solar system flickered in and out of existence, as if it had never been. Kane, barely keeping his composure, whispered, Earth, it's fading. Voss clenched her fists. We need to stop this. Now. Ward turned to her. How? They're rewriting the universe itself. Kane exhaled sharply. We have only one option. He pulled up a display, a detailed blueprint of the God engine. We destroy it. A final mission. The last remnants of humanity gathered at Outpost Zeta, a hidden station outside of time's collapse. Scientists, soldiers, and the last surviving leaders stood in silence as Ward addressed them. The Ascendants are reshaping everything, he said. And soon, there will be nothing left of the world we knew. He looked around. Fear, desperation, but also determination. Our ancestors fought to survive. Now, we fight to exist. He stepped aside, letting Kane take over. The engine is anchored to this universe, Kane explained. If we overload it, we might be able to break its connection. Voss frowned. Might? Kane hesitated. There's a problem. He pulled up a simulation. The engine's core was alive, constantly shifting. It wasn't just a machine. It was something else. And it had defenses. We could overload it, Kane continued, but only if someone manually triggers the detonation. Silence. Everyone understood what that meant. A one-way mission. Ward stepped forward. I'll do it. The descent into the machine. The Helios warped into the core of the God engine, a place that should not exist. The laws of time and space twisted. Planets froze in place. Stars moved backward. And in the center of it all, the engine pulsed, its golden surface shifting like liquid metal, humming with impossible energy. Voss gritted her teeth. That thing is alive. Kane checked the readings. It's not just alive, it's aware. Ward readied his weapon. Then let's hope it doesn't see us coming. The gods' warning. As they descended toward the core, a voice echoed through their minds. Kale's voice. I know why you've come. Ward clenched his fists. Then you know we're here to stop you. Cale laughed. The sound was everywhere, vibrating through the ship. Stop me, he mused. I am not your enemy, Ward. The lights flickered. The crew gasped as their reflections moved on their own. Visions filled their minds. Cities rising and falling, history rewritten in seconds. And at the center of it all, the engine. You do not understand, Cale's voice continued. The engine is not a tool. It is the architect of existence. Kane's face paled. It's not breaking reality. It's rebuilding it. Ward gritted his teeth. At the cost of everything that was. Cale's voice turned cold. Evolution comes at a price. Destroying the unbreakable, they reached the core. It was a sphere of shifting energy, the heart of the engine's infinite power. Kane worked fast, setting up the overload sequence. We need to disrupt the flow, force it into a collapse. Ward turned to him. Will it work? Kane hesitated. I don't know. A thunderous roar shook the chamber. The engine was fighting back. Voss shouted, We've got incoming. Figures formed from the energy itself. Ascendants who had merged fully with the engine. They weren't human anymore. And they weren't going to let them win. The last stand, Voss and the soldiers opened fire. But the Ascendants walked through space, dodging bullets like shadows. One of them reached for Ward. Voss tackled him out of the way. A searing beam vaporized her instantly. Ward froze. No time to grieve. No time for anything. Kane screamed, I need more time. Ward grabbed a rifle, taking cover as the Ascendants closed in. He fired. 1 shot. 2. 3. It did nothing. But then... The engine pulsed. A figure descended from the core. Cale. The final choice. Cale hovered above them, radiating raw power. You cannot win, he said. Destroy the engine, and you destroy everything. Ward clenched his fists. You're lying. Cale shook his head. Am I? Look around you. The universe is already breaking. He raised a hand. Reality shimmered, revealing visions of what could be. A new civilization. A new humanity. Ascended. Immortal. Gods. Cale extended his hand. Join us. Ward's heart pounded. The mission. The sacrifice. Was it worth it? Kane whispered, Ward, what do we do? The end or the beginning? Reality was collapsing. The God engine pulsed, shifting between dimensions, rewriting the universe in real time. Time fractured, past, present, and future colliding into chaos. The final battle had begun. The war for reality. Human warships burned in orbit, locked in battle against the Ascendants, beings who had transcended flesh. Their minds were pure energy, their bodies forged from the engine's power. Ward's fleet fired everything they had. Railguns, plasma cannons, annihilation warheads. Nothing worked. The Ascendants willed the attacks out of existence. And on the surface of the engine, Cale watched, waiting. The descent into madness. Inside the engine's core, Ward, Kane, and the last survivors of humanity fought their way through the impossible. The walls were alive, shifting between metal, flesh, and light. Whispers filled the air. Visions flashed before them. Cities that never were. Wars that had not yet begun. A universe where humanity had already ascended. Kane staggered, clutching his head. It's showing us the future. Ward gritted his teeth. No, it's showing us a choice. The voice of a god. As they reached the core, the engine spoke. Not with sound. Not with words. With truth. You were never meant to be just human. Ward froze. The others felt it too, a presence, vast and unknowable. Kane whispered, It's calling to us. The engine pulsed. You can destroy me and reset the cycle. or embrace what you are meant to become. The final choice. Kale descended from the shadows, his presence shaking reality itself. His eyes glowed with cosmic fire. He had merged fully with the engine. He was no longer Kale. He was something more. You understand now, he said. The universe doesn't need humans. Ward gripped his rifle. That's not your choice to make. Kale smiled. Isn't it? Look around you, Ward. This war, it's pointless. He raised a hand, and time stopped. Everything froze. The ships in orbit, the flames, even Kane. Only Ward remained. Kale stepped forward. You can destroy the engine, he said, but you'll be erasing everything. He gestured to the shifting reality around them. Or you can embrace it, become part of something greater. His eyes burned with infinite power. Join me. The last decision. Ward looked down at the detonator in his hand. One button, one choice. Destroy the engine. Reset everything. Merge with the engine. Become something else. His heart pounded. This was it. The end. Or the beginning. The choice is made. Ward exhaled and pressed the button.